Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate day number 592. 592. October the 29th, 2018, Monday. Monday, just 1 week out from the midterms. Pretty exciting on one hand, and on the other hand, I just want it to be over. I just want it to be over. Okay, let's get to the topics of the day. Sunday morning, Maria Bartiromo. She had John Ratcliffe. John Ratcliffe, former federal prosecutor, and also one of the few individuals who has seen nearly all of the classified documents that the rest of these committees want to see. He's seen the FISA warrants, he's seen the OR stuff, he's seen the, I understand he's seen the Comey text and emails. He's seen a lot of things, including all the Papadopoulos stuff. And he was there in that hearing when Papadopoulos came in this past Thursday. And now we're starting to learn why Papadopoulos has been going on TV the last 2 or 3 days and saying, yeah, I think I'm going to change my guilty plea and try to withdraw my guilty plea because of what I now know. So we got some insight into that from John Ratcliffe on Sunday morning with Maria Bartiromo. Because apparently Papadopoulos, now he has a new lawyer now, a different lawyer than he had back then, but Papadopoulos learned in that hearing with Ratcliffe and the other questioners something he did not know. And it was what he did not know was the exculpatory evidence that would have been favorable to his case that was not turned over to his attorneys, which, according to the Brady rule, Ratcliffe says the Brady rule was not followed. And apparently that's a rule that says that the FBI, when they go to a FISA court or the DOJ tries to launch an investigation like Operation Crossfire Hurricane, which is going to turn into Operation Backfire Hurricane here very shortly, that apparently this Brady rule says that you have to present any evidence that will be favorable to the target. And that apparently was not done. That is why Papadopoulos is now saying he has a case. And I didn't know that after sentencing you could withdraw your plea. But if the FBI violated the Brady rule in this case, that would be justification for Papadopoulos to go to the judge and plead his case. And if the judge finds it's true, and according to John Ratcliffe it is, yes, he would allow Papadopoulos to withdraw his guilty plea. Ratcliffe informed Papadopoulos that he, Ratcliffe, has seen classified documents which are exculpatory evidence or evidence that would be favorable to Papadopoulos. And this was new information to Papadopoulos. And that information was not given to Papadopoulos' lawyers. According to Ratcliffe, the government did not turn over all evidence that they had that was favorable to Papadopoulos' case. And based on this, according to John Ratcliffe, Papadopoulos can file a motion to withdraw his guilty plea. So, now we know. Now we know. This is pretty much what we suspected. And Ratcliffe doesn't specifically say what he's talking about, whether it's the 20 pages in the FISA warrant. I thought that had to do with Carter Page. I think a lot of people thought that. But it might also have to do with Papadopoulos. And of course, we've also been given a hint from Ratcliffe on an earlier interview with Maria Bartiromo that when Mueller was making his case against Papadopoulos, he conveniently left out Mr. Halper and Mr. Downer. There was references to confidential informants, but never named any of them, and didn't talk about the plot that they cooked up to frame Papadopoulos. They didn't tell the truth. They didn't tell the truth to the FISA court, and they withheld all this information when they put together the justification for Operation Crossfire Hurricane. That is called a crime. So now we know. Now we know. And if John Ratcliffe is correct, and we can assume he is, he was a former federal prosecutor, he's seen all these classified documents, it appears from what he said this morning that Papadopoulos will have a really good chance of getting his guilty plea withdrawn. And then he is going to move to hold these people accountable for framing him. Now, I don't know what the nature of that suit's going to be, whether it's going to be a civil suit, which he certainly could do, a suit against the government, a suit against the individuals, or all of the above, or whether he is simply going to cooperate, he and his attorneys, with the Judiciary Committee, or whatever committee it is, or the Department of Justice, whether he's going to go directly to them and have them do the work. It's really not clear exactly how he's going to approach this, but it's pretty clear at this point he has every intention of immediately, if not sooner, getting his guilty plea withdrawn. From that point, it's probably a wait and see, because I guess in Papadopoulos' mind and in the lawyer's mind, the investigation is still not complete, so there's probably a lot more evidence that could help him, which has not come to light, either because it's not been made available to members of Congress or to the Inspector General Huckleberry Horowitz, whose report has not yet been released on the FISA and on these other things. So they may be in a holding pattern waiting for this information to come out. But on the other hand, Papadopoulos' lawyers could say, well, we could be waiting for a year or two. Why don't we just go ahead and file a case in civil court, and we don't have to wait on them? We don't need to wait on them. We can file a case in civil court, and we can subpoena and have depositions of Halper, Downer, and Misfit ordered by the court, as well as Peters Ben Strokinus, the Dishonorable James Comey, and all the rest. And I think that's probably the way that they will go. And I think it's probably the way that members of Congress would advise Papadopoulos and his attorneys. They would probably prefer that, because maybe they'll have better luck than Congress is having fighting Rodenstein. But keep in mind, Rodenstein, after the midterms, is likely going to... A lot of people say he's been flipped. I don't know that Rodenstein... I wouldn't use the word flipped. To me, flipped is when you completely roll over and now you're going to go testify on behalf of the government. I don't know that Rodenstein's gone that far. I just think that Trump has him in a position where Trump has a lot of leverage on him. And keep in mind, Trump's goal overall, the number one thing on his mind, is ending the Mueller investigation. The other things he'll get to, but I don't think they're what's pressing on him right now. So there's different people with different interests. So I think that Papadopoulos and his lawyers are probably going to come to the conclusion that if they want this to happen in a speedy fashion or in an expedited fashion, that they're better off to go the civil court route and do what Mr. Gubarev has done and have the judge require these individuals sit for depositions. Just what was done in the Gubarev case could be done in the Papadopoulos case, where the judge could order Halper, Downer, Mifsud, and all the rest to sit for deposition. I think that's the way I would go if it were me. We'll just have to wait and see after the midterms, because I get the feeling, especially if the Republicans hold on to the House, that things are going to be expedited much quicker. But I think it's all going to happen after Mueller is gone, and I believe that's going to happen pretty quickly after the midterms. She also, Maria Bartiromo, also spoke briefly with Lindsey Graham, who apparently is out campaigning because he was outdoors somewhere. Pretty short interview, but what he said was pretty important to Maria Bartiromo, because she was asking him about, well, what if the Democrats win the House? all these investigations will likely come to an end. They'll be investigating Trump and blah, 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 which we all know and have heard before. And Lindsey Graham pretty much acknowledged that, yeah, if the Democrats win back the House, this is probably what they'll do. But he reminded her, he said, keep one thing in mind, Maria, after the midterms, if we hold the Senate, and I'm confident we will, I am going to become the head of the Judiciary Committee. He will become the head of the Judiciary Committee because Goodlatte is retiring, and Lindsey Graham is the next man up. And he told Maria Bartiromo, even if the Republicans win the House, or I mean if the Democrats win the House and they kill all the investigations going on in the House, he said it's not going to affect my investigations into the Senate. He said that has no effect on me or on the Senate. And I can tell you, I'm going to be the head of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I can assure you that I am going to investigate completely the dossier, the FISA warrants, the abuse of power by the DOJ and the FBI, and the whole 9 yards. I'm going to get to the bottom of all of it. So there you go. Losing the House doesn't necessarily mean that all the investigations stop, only on the House side. But on the Senate side, if Lindsey Graham is telling the truth, and if we can trust him, and lately he's been looking pretty good, was never a fan before, but lately he's been looking pretty good. If he follows through on what he told Maria Bartiromo, then it doesn't mean that all these investigations stop. They only stop in the House. They'll still be pursued in the Senate, which is fine. Doesn't matter to me which body does it. I honestly believe you need a special counsel, but so does Lindsey Graham, and that's why he will be pushing for. Another thing is, if the Democrats do win the House, and I don't think they will, but if they do, they don't officially take over until January. So the House Intelligence Committee, the House Joint Committees, have interviewed a lot of people. They've looked at a lot of documents, not everything they want, and they have not been able to talk to everyone they want. But they have talked to a lot of people. They have looked at a lot of documents. They still have about a month and a half after the midterms to put out their report. And this is likely what they would do if they lose the House. They will put out their report, get all their information together, put out a final report, and they'll make a referral to the DOJ for investigation into the Spygate. Now let's say the Dems do take over the House and the report comes out by the House, then the Dems take over and they stop investigating. Too late, because the Republicans would have already sent their report to the DOJ or whoever. But on the Senate side, Graham will keep pushing and will keep investigating, and eventually he will produce a report along with his comrades, will produce their own report also calling for a special counsel or something to be done about the abuse of power by the FBI, the DOJ, the intelligence community, and all the rest. So, this thing ain't over. That's what I'm saying. This thing ain't over, even if the Dems get the House, and I don't think that they will. I'm predicting Republicans hold the House with 222 seats. A slim majority. Well, the left-wing media is already preparing their demented disciples, the commie-crats, for the disappointment that's coming from the Mueller Report. They're preparing the commie-crat followers, the lemmings, to prepare themselves for Mueller's report, which will say that there was no collusion. They're also preparing them for the fact that he may not even release his report to the public. And, as has been explained in the New York Times, Uncle Bob the Executioner was appointed by Rodenstein, and he's working for Rodenstein. And once Uncle Bob finishes his report, it goes to Rodenstein. That's right, the guy who Trump has all the leverage over. The report goes to Rodenstein. Mueller doesn't release it or decide to release it. He makes his report and he gives it to Rodenstein. Rodenstein decides what to do with the report, whether to make it public, some, all, or none of it. And of course, we know that Trump has all the leverage on Rodenstein. So that is something everyone will have to prepare themselves for. And that's probably why Trump is working Rodenstein, because he knows it's not Mueller is not the man. Rodenstein is the man. He's the guy who will decide what happens to the report, and probably what's in the report. Because my guess, like a lot of you, believe that Uncle Bob the Executioner probably has at least 2 reports. One if the Dems get the House, and one if the Dems do not get the House. And Rodenstein can play it either way. Rodenstein's looking out for himself, number one. But he knows that Trump's got him by the short hairs, and Trump has all this leverage over him. And I think there's already been a deal cut that right after the midterms, Rodenstein's going to get the Mueller report, because he's probably already told Uncle Bob, hey, Uncle Bob, as soon as the midterms are over, I want your report. I want your report. And once he gets it, he can either not put out some of it, none of it, whatever he does. But my guess is Rodenstein is going to do what he has to do because of the leverage Trump has on him, which is he's going to make it go away very quietly. That's what I'm thinking. Rodenstein also knows, just like Uncle Bob the Executioner and his Hillary donor posse all know, that they now stand in the line of fire for criminal liability because they've been part of a cover-up. All this exculpatory information on Papadopoulos, Carter Page, lying to the FISA court, the whole 9 yards. Uncle Bob's had access to every bit of that information and knows about all of it. Yet he continued the witch hunt. He's liable. An obstruction. And a cover-up. He's probably looking for a little cover from Rodenstein himself via Trump. Barack Hussein Obama, the Kenyan, the illegal Kenyan president, former president, continues to go out and spout his rhetoric. It's unbelievable. I mean, right out of the book of Lewinsky, man. Calling Trump a dictator, and you've heard it all. I'm not even going to go through it all, but you know what I'm talking about. So, he was recently in Milwaukee. Barack Hussein Obama, the Kenyan, was recently in Milwaukee, and he could not even fill up a high school gymnasium. Could not even fill a high school gymnasium. And I watched a few minutes of that, all I could take of it. And I'm telling you, Barack Hussein, the Kenyan, he's frightened. He's frightened because he knows that if the Republicans hold on to the House and if Trump continues moving the way he is, that they are going to expose the attempted coup that Barack Hussein Obama, the Kenyan, was intimately involved in. This is why they're stirring all that division. Because when the day comes when they all find themselves under indictment or investigation, they need to be able to say, oh, well, this is Trump going after his enemies. He's a tyrant. He's a dictator. This is what they're going to try to do. It's not going to work. Because ultimately the evidence will be made clear of exactly what happened in 2016 and that Barack Hussein Obama, the Kenyan, was intimately involved, is one of the chief orchestrators, one of the chief conductors of that criminal symphony. There's fear in the eyes of Barack Hussein Obama. And he's really off his game too, by the way. He's still doing the NLP stuff. But, you know, you look out that audience and a lot of the things that he used to say when he was popular and could draw huge crowds, he would get this huge rounds of applause. He would get lots of really engaged people in the audience. They look like a bunch of lemmings sitting out in the audience now. He doesn't get big applause lines. It doesn't seem like he's really on his game at all. It seems like he's like distracted in his mind. And of course, he's just following the book of Saul Alinsky. Blame your opponent for what you do. Everything he says is exactly what they did in 2016, talking about corruption and government and all this stuff. It's just absolutely amazing. And he's even telling the audience, no one in my administration was investigated or were indicted or whatever. Right. The truth is coming out for you, Mr. Obama. You can run, but you can't hide. Not even in Kenya. And so I think that Barack Hussein Obama, based on his performance, lackluster performance in the past week, his continued lies and spin and fear-mongering, qualifies him as the dumbass of the week. Because nobody's buying it anymore. Can't even fill up a high school gymnasium. No one wants to hear it. Because a lot of people are looking at the last 2 years and going, you know what? Trump's doing a pretty damn good job. And when you compare it to the 8 years of the Kenyan, it's not even close. And people are starting to figure that out. They're not buying his bullshit anymore. And he knows what's coming down the road for him. He certainly does. Over the weekend was the big walk away march in D.C. Hopefully some of you got to watch some of the video footage of that. Very long line of people. The crowd estimated to be somewhere around 5,000, which is really pretty good when you consider what this movement is. People walking away from the Democratic Party. Had a lot of good speakers there, including the founder, this Brandon Stoika. Had Owen Schroyer from InfoWars was there, and quite a few other people were there. Gave some good speeches. It was a cold, rainy, windy, dreary day. But still, 5,000 of those people came out, and people were being interviewed. They were coming from all over the country, everywhere you can imagine, from California, out in the West, all the way up the East Coast, the Midwest, the South. People came from everywhere. It was a pretty good showing, and a lot of people walking away from the Democratic Party. Now, if only 1 in 100 of the people who walked away actually showed up, that tells you that it's probably somewhere around 50,000 Democrats have walked away at this point. Could be a lot more. Many people just won't talk about it. They don't want to come out and admit it or say it. It's definitely going to have an impact. You can bet on that. Well, the Uncle Bob the Executioner and his Hillary donor posse, their case against Concord Management and the 13 Trolls is just about over. And the most recent hearings that came up this past week, the judge, well, actually Concord Management had made their third plea to the judge to dismiss the case, to toss it. Because there's now been 2 previous attempts to have it tossed. Both times the judge told Uncle Bob, well, you're going to have to do better because at this point you've not proven, number one, what the statute is that was violated, and proven that these individuals did violate the statute. 2 of the individuals that you've named did not even exist at the time that the alleged crime occurred. So this final hearing, which appears to be the final hearing, the judge still not satisfied with what Uncle Bob and the executioner and his team has delivered to the judge in this case, convened again, and again, Concord Management said, look, the last stuff that they produced is still not showing exactly the statute. In fact, if this is the statute they're saying it was violated, it was not, and they have not proven that. And the judge agreed. He said, yeah, I agree. They have still not provided the evidence to show that if this is the statute that they say was violated, they've not proven that that occurred. They've not proven their case. The judge apparently has given Uncle Bob the Executioner and the Hillary donor posse one last opportunity to prove their case. So, sometime very shortly after the midterms, in the next couple of weeks to come, it's likely the judge is going to toss the case against Concord Management and the 13 Trolls, because Uncle Bob has never been able to produce the evidence to support the criminal statute he says was violated. Producing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of printed internet material in Russian didn't really do the trick. Didn't work. expect that case to be tossed right after the midterms. This is all Uncle Bob wanted to do. He knew he never had a case. All he wanted to do was have the propaganda out there because he needed something. He just wants this to last until the midterms. Once the midterms are over, he knows this case will be tossed, but that was his only objective, was to make this thing last until the midterms. I think it's pretty obvious to the judge and to Concord management and to everyone else that's paying any attention exactly what this case was. It was a ham sandwich that will not be, in this case, indicted. There is no longer any doubt that NBC News deliberately set on information that would have cleared Kavanaugh on the gang rape allegations made by Avenatti and his nutty client, Miss Swetnick. The unidentified female witness, which debunked her claim, was known by NBC when they ran that story. Not only that, we're now learning that after they ran the story, this currently unidentified witness contacted NBC. Said, hey, you ran that story where Avenatti and you folks are twisting my words. Not right and not true. But despite her making that phone call to NBC, they did not pull back on the story at all or add the additional information. They let it ride and stayed with the story, knowing good and well it was false. NBC needs to be also brought in front of the Judiciary Committee or Oversight Committee. They need to answer for their actions. And if I were Kavanaugh, I would file a civil suit against NBC as well. They should have their license pulled. I would file a petition with the FCC to look at that and see if you can get their license suspended. Maybe 30, 60, 90 days. That's all it would take. Having a major news organization, NBC, would likely include MSNBC because they covered the same, using the same witness that they also knew debunked the very story they were doing. It's likely they would both lose their license, and it's hard to recover as a news organization when you've had your license suspended for a period of time for reporting fake news, especially over the issue of the nomination or confirmation of a Supreme Court justice. That's a big deal. The Salsa Invasion, the Salsa invaders, I should say, have been offered asylum by Mexico. They have rejected it, saying they're coming to the U.S. Well, they may be coming, thinking they're coming here, but they're not getting in. I'm pretty sure of that. We'll watch and see how they do. The latest CBS poll, which you can take with a grain of salt, shows Martha McSally down 3 points to Kristen Sinema in that Nevada race. 47-44. Which brings me to the final topic of the day, and that is the fact that I spent 3 hours almost last night just looking over at Real Clear Politics, because Real Clear Politics probably has the best site for tracking polls. Real Clear Politics puts up all the polls, and when I say all the polls, I mean they put up every poll, and you cannot believe how many different polls they refer to on that site. Local polls, state polls, county polls, nationwide polls, professional polling agencies, news firms partnering with private companies. You name it, it's all there. There's polls there I've never even heard of. But when you look at it all, and you go through it like I did last night for several hours, it's amazing the inconsistency and differences across this wide range of polling. What does that tell us? Well, it tells us it's the same thing we saw in 2016. Number one, there's a lot of gaslighting going on. There's a lot of fake polling going on. I'm looking at one race last night, which is a pivotal race that a lot of people are watching as a possible bellwether race. That 5th district in Kentucky for the House seat. And there was 3 polls shown in the last week. One was a state of Kentucky poll. The other was like a Rasmussen, and the other was like a Ipso poll or something. The variance between these polls was literally 13, 14, 15 points. You had one race showing the Republican, 3 different polls covering the same race a week apart. One showing the Republican up by 6, another one showing the Democrat up by 11. How do you make sense of that? Well, the only sense you can make of it is the polling can't be that far off. They've been doing polling for years, and it used to be pretty accurate polling. But since 2016, when they started distorting polls and gaslighting and doing all these other things, using polls as a weapon, weaponizing polling, it's pretty much distorted and destroyed anybody's ability to look at polls. That's why I'm not really counting too much on polls. We certainly look at them, but I'm not basing hardly anything of my prediction on any of the polling. Or very little on polling. You can look at the aggregate as probably the only thing you can do to even get close, but the polling is so far off with so many different polling agencies. They're so far off in the gaslighting and the fake polling that even the aggregates are being thrown out of shape. That even the aggregates are not really able to work because there's so many variances. So we can see a lot of hanky-panky going on just as it did in 2016. And just as we saw in 2016, what they do, these polling agencies, is they wait till the last day, the day of the election, and then on the day of the election, they actually put out a poll that's probably pretty close to what the truth is. Why? So that a year from now, or the next election comes, they can say, see, here's how accurate we were last time, and they can show you the only accurate poll they ever did, which was the day of voting. All the other polls they did for months and months before that, all completely fake polls, gaslighted polls, and everything else you'll never see. But they have to make sure that they get the poll on the day before the election right, because that's what they're going to use the next time around to show you that they're legit. You see the exact same thing going on. I bet you on the very last day you go over to Real Clear Politics and all those polls, most of those polls, are going to drastically be modified to reflect something much closer to the truth. Here's another thing. They keep talking about, yeah, we know what the numbers are of early voters, Republican or Democrat. But what we really don't know is how they're voting. But we can get some insight into that with a little common sense, and we don't need polls to tell us that. Let's look at the facts. President Trump, we know, is one of the most popular Republican presidents with Republican voters we've seen in modern history. It appears to be somewhere around 90, even over 90% of Republicans love Trump. So, I think it's fairly safe to assume that the Republicans who are going in early voting are probably voting for Trump. They're Republicans, and we already know that over 90% of them love him. So they're probably not going to go vote for the Democrats. But on the other hand, we have the Democrats. We don't know who they're going to vote for, but we know all their so-called leaders are not that popular, even with them. So I'd say there's very little likelihood that Trump voters are going to go vote, these early voters or people who are going to go vote on the day of the election are going to vote against Trump. Republican voters are probably going to vote with Trump and vote straight down the party line ticket. Democrat voters, on the other hand, there's a very good chance that a significant portion of them could switch and vote for Republicans to support Trump. That is certainly one conclusion that we can draw, and the only one we can really draw. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow with more TowerGate. You guys have a good night. Goodbye.